Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Sarah Adams, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. And my daughter is too, like I told you. Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go up to today. And then we want to talk about Benghazi, which is a book I love, by the way, Know Thy Neighbor, right? And I also love The Gathering Storm. And I want to talk about that and specifically what you and Scott Mann are doing together with Legend, right? To sort of bring to the forefront what's going on. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So where were you born?
So I was born in Michigan. My mom was like in engineering school and she had me while she was in college.
Yeah. Did you grow up in Michigan?
Yeah, I ended up growing up there.
So what was your favorite thing about growing up in Michigan?
Well, I mean, I was in the era where you were out till it got dark and, we lived by the woods. And so, it's like it was just always freedom and you're always exploring and, you're always on a trail. We had forts in the woods, those type of things. And I was in a very small town, so perfectly safe and everyone was your friend. So it was a really great upbringing.
And everybody watched out for each other?
Oh, yeah. Well, not that, but everybody knew each other. So if you did anything wrong, your parents found out, so you couldn't.
Right. Everybody was in everybody else's business, right?
It was a spy. Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
almost no anonymity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Well, I mean, I think it was just my parents, right? And I mean, that's who that's your world. And at that time, obviously, we didn't have things like the internet and stuff, right? So, it was like you emulated your parents. My mom spent a lot of time doing international travel, and so that's what got me into like that type of thing.
So thinking about the world, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah, she used to be like a vice president for like a Finnish paper company, and so she would go Scandinavia, China, all over the world. So it always fascinated me. And I was like, I'm going to do that when I grow up.
There you go. So what's the single most important thing you learned from your parents growing up?
I think it's just stick to who you are, your values. I luckily grew up, where you love your neighbor, you can trust in each other, you're there for each other. So just being reliable, being there for each other, I think that's really important.
Yeah. So in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
So in high school, my favorite subject was maybe sports. I mean, maybe history, but I don't want to call it my favorite. I really just kind of went through class and was like, when's this going to be over? But I like sports. I like played basketball, those type of things.
So basketball is your favorite sport?
Yeah, basketball is definitely my favorite sport. It still is.
Did you have a favorite teacher in high school?
Yes, I did. His name is Mr. Kangas. He actually was a junior high teacher, but I'm still friends with him to this day.
That's awesome. Isn't it amazing how teachers impact us?
Yeah. And I had a lot of great teachers too. And you have the same teachers when you grow up in those small towns, right? So you have them again and again too. So you know them for many years. So it's kind of a different scenario than in some of these bigger schools where you have different teachers every year.
And it's one and done kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So after high school, where do you go?
So after high school, I went to college for a couple of years in Michigan where I lived. And then I actually moved down to Florida and I did like the Walt Disney World College program. And then I stayed in Florida.
Wow. So had you always wanted to work for Disney?
No, I had a roommate who wanted to go do the program and she didn't want to go to the interviews alone. So she took me and I sat in the room with her and they interviewed me too and they took me too. So I didn't even apply.
Wow. So you were just along for the ride for moral support,
Yeah.
and you end up getting him. You ended up getting hired.
That's what always happens when you're someone's wingman, so you better be prepared.
I love that. That's awesome. You're
So,
obviously an amazing wingman.
yeah, totally. But she got hired too, so it
Yeah,
worked out well. I didn't like take her slot or something.
that's awesome. That's awesome. So, what was your favorite thing about working at Disney or learning at Disney?
Well, it was really interesting because at Disney, everyone's really young or
Hmm.
everyone's really old. And so it's
Hmm.
fascinating, right? Because all the young people are either college students or they're international students. And then all the old people are retired and have lived these great, interesting lives. So you just got to be around some of the most interesting people. And you had that whole layer that doesn't exist, that middle management, the ladder climbers, like none of them were there. So it's just a great environment. Everyone kind of came in, had fun, so it was a really cool place to be, especially, through college.
That's awesome. So, in college at with Disney World, was there a college down there that you were where you were going to school?
Well, the interesting thing is they run their own college program. So you
Oh my
work in the
goodness! So
parks
it's
and then
actually
you
their
go through.
school.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
like
I didn't.
they teach you classes like, leadership,
Yeah.
management, customer service, and you go through a program for like a semester. But then, yes, I stayed in Florida. I went to school near there, and I actually stayed working at Disney for a few more years.
Wow. So, what was the most important thing you learned from Disney?
I learned that everyone communicate you can communicate with anybody no matter
Mhm.
where they're from, right? We all kind of have a universal language. Is it a smile? Is it the way you point to something? Like you can tell when someone's lost, those type of things. So I just learned I can talk to anyone and I can get through to anyone, and that made it very comfortable when I was overseas, in different situations.
Sounds like you developed sensory acuity.
Yeah, something like that. You kind of have to when there's so many things going
Yeah,
on.
absolutely. Absolutely. But it sounds like you fine tuned it a little bit. That's cool. That's a great skill.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't have it, right? Let alone
Yeah.
have fine tuned it, you know? So you leave Disney and you leave school. Where do you go from there?
So then I went to grad school and I actually went out to San Diego. So I
Really?
went to do, yeah, I went to do like an international relations program. It was at the University of San Diego. I really just wanted to like live in certain cities. So I applied to school in Boston, Chicago, and San Diego because I wanted to live in those cities. So that's how that happened. Remember, you're young, so you can just choose by where you want to live.
Absolutely. So what was your favorite thing about San Diego?
San Diego.
Yeah,
So
pretty
I
awesome.
we were in this amazing, yeah, we were in this amazing campus and it was like on a hill and you could see
Mhm.
the ocean. So it was really, really beautiful. So it was like living in a fairy tale. Sorry,
No, it's
I
okay. I
caught your
got the same
cough.
cough. I mean, you and I have been drinking the same water apparently. So
Yeah.
I actually know USD pretty well. I've actually worked down there and spent a lot of time there. And San Diego, I've been in the San Diego area for 45 years. So I love it here. It's amazing. One of the prettiest places I've ever seen and certainly ever lived. So after school, so what was your graduate degree in?
So my degree was international relations, but my grad thesis was Kashmir. So it was very limiting.
Gotcha. Okay. So after grad school, where do you go?
So then I went for a short time to Tucson and I worked kind of it like for the city, and I worked
Mhm.
in a small office where they were kind of looking at maybe building an inland port. So I worked on a project. And then at the time I applied to CIA. So I was going through the process to be hired during that time.
What made you apply to the CIA? What made you have an interest in it?
Because I did grad thesis on Kashmir. So I had nowhere else to apply to. So
Okay.
point, we got to think through those things earlier. Yeah, so it was actually the night before I defended my thesis, I was preparing, and then I was like, oh my gosh, when am I going to apply to a job? And so that night I went on the website and applied. So that was Halloween, and then they called me December 6th for my first interview. So it
Wow,
luckily went
that's
pretty quick.
fast. That's pretty fast,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was really lucky because they don't get many people with like that type of expertise coming in. And
Yeah.
so they needed more people in the Pakistan, Afghanistan department at the time.
So what was it so you're in grad school. Sorry to go back a little bit, but you're in
No
grad
worries.
school and you're trying to pick a subject for your thesis. What was it that attracted you to Kashmir that made you decide to do that?
Yeah, it actually happened in my first class. So in our first
Wow.
class, we had to pick a country to write about. So I was going to do Germany, and then someone before me picked Germany, and then I was going to do India, and someone before me picked India. So when they got to me, I said, "Well, could I just do Kashmir? I mean, I know it's India, but it's still unique because it was a write up about terrorism." And so they said, "Sure." And so then from first class on, I just always had like a Kashmir focus. So then when I went to do my thesis, it was just a natural fit because I've gotten so much expertise over the different classes I focused on it.
So it sort of grabbed your interest.
Yeah, well, it was just like I couldn't do Germany, and that's what I wanted to do because I had been a German minor in undergrad. So that's how it happens sometimes, right? You just
Well, it's
kind of
kind of your
fall into
third choice,
place.
right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but it
Wow.
worked.
So you applied to the CIA. They call you in just over 30 days. Wow, that has got to be fast, in terms of the normal time frame. I don't think the federal government moves that fast, do they? But they call you. Let's talk about that for just a second. What was it like when you got the call? And then what was it like when did they send you to Washington D.C. to interview?
Yeah, so when I got the call, I thought it was fake. I wasn't sure it was real. Um, but I really never thought I was
You,
going to get a job
you
there.
thought somebody
You
was
know,
pranking you?
Yeah, because I was like, "Oh, the CIA just calls and says we're the CIA," like, so I wasn't really trusting. And then, yeah, they had me fly to Virginia. And then the interesting part is I went to the interview, and like it was a little delayed. And then a woman came in and she said, "Oh, your interviewer is sick, so I'm interviewing you, but I'm sick, so it's gonna be a really quick interview." And then she was like, "Oh, we really wanted you because of your Kashmir background. Do you have any questions?" And I was like, "No." And she's like, "Great." And that was like my interview. And then so she
Are
leaves
you
and I was like,
serious
"Oh my
right now?
gosh." Yeah, that
That
was
was
my
it?
interview. They asked me no questions.
Oh
So
my
because she was sick.
goodness.
I think she didn't want to get me sick. So so then I left being like, well, they really either just wanted me and this interview was nothing anyway, or like I didn't know, or I thought, oh, it's the government that had to interview people and it was just like checking a box. So yeah, so I left like unsure, but I was still kind of confident because of her demeanor. She
Yeah.
was super nice. So yeah, so I was like, okay. And then yeah, they called me like, I don't know, a week or two later and we're like, hey, we'll give you a conditional offer. It's gonna come in the mail. And then then we're gonna plan things like your background check, your polygraph, your medical, those type of things. And so it all went pretty fast after that.
Wow. So they were looking to place somebody, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I had a really good fit for the office, and the woman who interviewed me, she was sitting kind of in the same office I'd be sitting in, just like a parallel division.
Oh wow.
So it was even the people interviewing me who I'd be going and sitting under.
Oh wow. That's cool. Wow, what a great fit.
Yeah, it just worked out.
But yeah,
It was
no
the easiest
kidding.
interview I've ever done.
That
I
is
sat through all
wild.
these crazy mind games and these
Yeah.
weird questions,
All
like
the
so
stuff you see
not
in
at all.
movies
And
and all that, right?
yeah,
None of
nothing.
that? None of that. You're kind of
But
like,
when Boone was recruited, though, my co-author from Benghazi, the enemy, they did weird things. Like they made him like get on a plane to Germany and go to a phone booth. So some people have a way more interesting story, but mine wasn't.
oh wow. And yours is the CIA story. What's up with that?
Yeah, yeah.
What a
So
crack
it
up.
happens.
So I love this. This is so cool. So you start at CIA. Talk about your first day. Talk about your first official day. What was that like?
So my first day was really funny. So my first day was in June, and I go into the building and there's this huge long line. So I'm thinking it's like the line for orientation, and then I realize it's the line for the Dunkin' Donuts, and I was like, why are there like 200 people in line for Dunkin' Donuts? These people are so weird. And it was the day the Dunkin' Donuts opened. So my first day was basically like a national holiday in the CIA because I guess I've been waiting a long time for this Dunkin' Donuts to open. So yeah, everybody was in a really good mood that day.
Never underestimate the power of pent up demand, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
sugar.
Yes.
Sugar and caffeine is apparently a
Yeah.
magical mix when it comes to the CIA. Wow. That is
Yeah,
so funny because they
they
give
love
cops
Dunkin'
crap about that all
Donuts.
the time, you know?
Like, don't think they're all snobby up there. They're Dunkin' Donuts people.
I love it, man. I love it. That's so cool. Donuts actually carry weight. This is cool. So, so on your first day, so did your first day go fast? Was it rapid? Was it slow? What was it like?
The interesting thing is your whole first week, you start with every single person starting that week at the CIA. So no matter what job.
So
And
you're
so
all
you got
new.
to meet all these, yes, you're all new and you got to meet all these interesting people. And at the end
Wow.
of that week, I was like, oh my gosh, they hired me into the wrong part of the CIA. They hired me as an analyst, but all these ops people are more like me. And my job sounds boring. So I actually almost resigned the next Monday because I told my boss, I was like, I don't want to be an analyst.
Oh my goodness. So you wanted to be an ops. You felt like you were more that was more in your ability, right? Than being an analyst. So you didn't want to push a desk. You wanted to be out amongst them. You wanted to be out where the action was. So what did your
And the
boss
cool part
say?
is, yeah, so I told him that my first day in the office, so it's now the second Monday of my career.
Right.
Um, and he's like, "Oh, that's perfectly fine." He was the nicest guy. He's like, "I'll just let you work on the ops side for as long as you want." And so he always let me work operational stuff. So it's funny, I was a CIA analyst, but I never wrote like they call them PDB, right? It's like
Yeah.
kind of the memo to the president. I'm probably the
Right.
only CIA analyst who never wrote one because I hardly ever wrote because I worked operations. So yeah, he let me do that from my first day. So I always got to do kind of like targeting work instead of analytic work.
Wow, that's wild. So what's the main difference? I mean, obviously analytics is or analysis is you're writing these, like you said, PDAs and that kind of thing. So you have, or not PDA, sorry. What's the acronym?
Yeah, presidential daily briefs are like
PDB.
the top of the line
Yeah,
product. Yeah.
not PDA. PDA is public document, right? Um,
Whatever
so
that is. No, I'm
so
kidding.
PDB, I got you. So you weren't writing PDBs, you were actually out amongst them making stuff happen, right?
Yeah, so I was supporting operations. So analysts most of the time are responding to someone. Usually it's Congress. It's
Mhm.
someone writing a question to the CIA, and then they're giving a response. And then, so that's the analyst job. And then at the time, they were making a new profession called targeters, but
Mhm.
you couldn't apply to be a targeter yet, like on the CIA website. It wasn't available. So
Gotcha.
my boss let me be a targeter. And in that job, you support operations. So all your work is basically for the field.
So you're trying to find targets for them? You're
Yeah.
zeroing
So
in
you
on.
find them. Yeah. It can be targets like somebody would think a terrorist, but it also
Mhm.
could be someone like, oh, you need access to the North Korean missile program.
Yeah.
This person could be an access point. So it's not, so it's sometimes access, sometimes bad guys.
Right. So you're basically saying, okay, operative in the field, go talk to this person. Go take
Yes,
this
like this
person.
and why.
Go, yeah, right. Go do this type thing, right? So you basically, as a targeter, it sounds like you have the boots on the ground, whether they be military or intelligence or both, and you're basically saying, okay, I need you to do this. I need you to do that, right? So like in
Yeah.
in Zero Dark 30, the redhead in Zero Dark 30 that kept writing on the thing. By the way, did you sorry, did you relate to that movie at all?
Well, I know her, so I know the
Do
real
you really?
Maya. Yeah, I mean, I sat next to her for several months. Even we were like in desks right next to each other. So I had worked with her for years. I met her
Wow.
first in 2006,
Yeah.
and then she
When
got
did
Bin
you
Laden
start at
one in like
CIA?
2011. So that year, 2006, and so I
Okay.
met her my first. I met her within my first few months of CIA, so I
Gotcha.
knew her well. And then when I did my like long stint overseas, she was
Mhm.
there with me when she was obviously working Bin Laden, and ended up getting him a couple years later. And I worked like the senior leaders of the Taliban at the time, but we sat in the same targeting office for many years.
Oh
So
wow.
the movie's done really, really well. It's very consistent with her.
Oh cool. So when you watched the movie, how did you feel?
So it was interesting because the movie is actually extremely accurate. There's only a couple pieces that weren't. Like there's a piece she's attacked at her home. That happened, but it was like to a State Department officer in another city in Peshawar. But for the most part, it was very, very accurate. So I thought it was done really well and it was really good to watch. Sometimes movies, even 13 hours, the personalities are very different. So I have a hard time watching it. It combined characters. So it's not as accurate to watch. Just from the people you knew, but that movie was pretty accurate from the people I worked with. So it was done really well and was interesting. And the CIA was very involved in helping make the movie, and that's why it was so accurate.
So we're going to talk about this in a bit, but I have to ask you this because it's burning. It's burning. I have to ask you. So you get into the CIA in 2006, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much of you deciding to get into the CIA and to pursue what you were pursuing in terms of your studies and everything had to do with 9/11?
It actually didn't. So my undergrad, I was in undergrad when 9/11 happened and I was going to school for international business. So I was at college the day 9/11 happened. And then they obviously closed college. I went home and then I was supposed to work that night at Disney and Disney amazingly closed. And so I was like, the world's
Yeah.
ending, right? Disney doesn't close for anything.
Ever, right?
Ever. I know two times ever, 9/11,
COVID?
and then one time built this big tree in the animal kingdom and they didn't make it for high enough winds and there was one day they thought it might fall over and they closed it.
I
And
remember
that's it.
that.
That's
It
all
was
I
leaning or
remember. Yeah.
something, right? Yeah. It was
Yeah,
like
yeah. They thought,
endangering. Yeah.
yeah,
I remember
that's
that.
it.
Yeah. Wow.
Ever that I can think of. So yeah, but I still wasn't, I was on a track to do
Yeah.
business, and that's what my brain was. And I didn't even consider that the government would even want me or my background. I had no background at the time,
Right.
right? In even national security or terrorism or global affairs yet. So it just didn't even dawn on me actually when 9/11 happened. Because, I was like my early 20s and didn't think that's you can just apply to the CIA and get in, right? It
Gotcha.
was nothing I would have considered.
So it wasn't something that propelled you.
No, it wasn't.
So looking back, and this is, again, I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but looking back, the day that 9/11 happened, you were in school.
Mhm.
How did 9/11 impact you?
Well, it was really interesting because it actually taught me, right, how when there's no communication, how confusing it can be, right? And I
Mhm.
was like really good about communication because of it. Because what happened is classes ended
Mhm.
and then there was no announcements, right? And so you leave class and everyone's leaving class at the same time. It's normal time. So it's not like they close classes and said evacuate. So then you're walking around to go to the other classes and everyone's like, go home. The school's closing. And then you have no idea why. So I actually was like, well, I'm going to have to go get some answers somewhere. So I roamed over to the library. And in the library, they were just pulling out this like TV on a stand. Like
Oh,
young people
wow.
are not going to know what that is, right?
Yeah.
And they pulled out this little TV. I swear it was maybe 12 inches.
Oh,
And they
wow.
like turned it on. And that's when we saw at least footage of the second plane hitting. And
Yeah.
then I was like, oh my gosh, this is an attack. And then
Mhm.
that's when I was like, okay, I'm leaving campus. But there was nobody was explaining anything. Nobody knew what was going on. Every student was just saying, we got to leave, but no one knew why. So it was very confusing. And like I said, it makes me always want to be more prepared during emergencies and crises, right? Because you can put people in a bad situation if they aren't clear what's going on or they don't know this isn't here. And you know what I mean? Those type of
Yeah.
things. People were pretty panicked.
There was a lot of confusion that day, and
Mm-hmm.
I was actually supposed to be in the air. That day, I was
Crazy.
supposed to be I would have been in the air right over West Texas, roughly, right? New Mexico, West Texas area, when they called the ground stop. And so, full stop, right? And so everybody had to land, and you had to land at
Mm-hmm.
wherever the nearest airport was. You didn't have
Yeah.
like a choice, right? And so there's no telling where I would have ended up. But at the time, I was opening a real estate office out here, and I had been gone every single month the previous 12 months. And my wife walked out to me and said a couple of months prior, and she said, "Are you going somewhere in September?" And I told her I was. And I told her I was leaving September 11th to go to this thing. And she said, "You have two little ones at home. why don't you stay home that month? Now, I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know if she had a premonition. I don't know why she said that. She just wanted me to stay home with the babies, right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
stayed home. And she woke me up that morning and said, "You got to see this," and turned it on, and the first tower had been hit. And I was like, "What?" Right? And then obviously everything just went nuts, right? So anyway, I was curious about it because I kind of ask everybody, especially people that are in your space, because
Mm-hmm.
it affected everybody differently. Like Scott was driving with his
Mm-hmm.
commanding officer. He was just off base and he was driving
Right.
with the commanding officer when it hit. And they got word of it and they like flipped a Huey and went back. And then it was just like, and then he described what it was like in that room. I think you probably have heard him talk about it, but
Mm-hmm.
he
Yep.
described what it was like in that room, and it's like eerie, right? Because it's like everybody
Mm-hmm.
knows we're going to war. This is our lives have changed permanently. So
Yep.
in 2006, you're now in ops, right? At some point, you end up in Afghanistan, or working on
Neighboring
Afghanistan from
country.
here.
It's actually working in Pakistan.
Okay, Pakistan. Sorry. So did you go to Pakistan or were working in Pakistan with the lady that found Osama bin Laden?
Yeah, I worked for a couple years in Pakistan, off and on from 2006. And then my last trip, I actually went after the bin Laden raid because a lot of people went home because they were afraid the Pakistanis might detain them or stuff. So then Pakistan stopped issuing visas. So CIA did a call who still has a Pakistani visa and who's willing to go to Pakistan under these circumstances. And I volunteered. And so I went to Pakistan after the bin Laden raid and went back to work there.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What made you decide to do that? That had to take some chutzpah.
Well, I mean, I love the work and
Yeah,
I knew they needed the bodies, right?
yeah,
And really, if we wanted to restart operations. You didn't
yeah.
want a long period of time where there's a stand down. And I knew I had a really good relationship with the local, authorities and intelligence agency. So I knew if I went there, I'd be helpful and useful too. So,
Yes.
so I just went out there being like, let's get things started again. Let's get things going again. Let's go back after terrorists again. And that was my goal to do that.
Did you feel at risk at all?
Not really, because I had been there at that time, I don't know, 6 times or 7 times, so I was
Okay.
pretty comfortable at that time, yeah.
So you had a pretty good network, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'd spent a lot of time over there, I knew a lot of people, and then I had interesting relationships from being there for so long. I mean, every guard at the checkpoints knew me, all the guards at the embassies knew me, a lot of locals in all, like, the stores and shops had known me because 'cause I've been going there for so long, right? So,
Yeah.
I felt pretty comfortable there.
That's cool. That's awesome, man. I mean, for you to go back, that says a lot. It says a lot about your character, about your commitment to our country. I mean, it's you're moving me. I'm telling you. You already had, and I admire you even more now. So as you're working in the CIA and you're working in Pakistan, when did you actually end up leaving Pakistan and coming back here?
That was my last trip.
Okay,
It was maybe like I came back, I don't know, maybe like the October after the Bin Laden raid,
gotcha.
and then I stopped working in Pakistan after that point.
Gotcha. So I have a question. I know you didn't work on this, but since you were in country and you were right next to the lady that found him, I mean, what an amazing person, right? What was the key to finding him? What was the thing that sort of I mean, obviously we've seen, Dark 30, right? What was the key to
Hmm.
finding him, do you think?
I 100% know what it is. The key was the exclusion of information. Okay, so Maya had like one of those photographic memories. She
Mhm.
never forgot anything and never missed
True.
anything. Well, we had all these terrorists, as you know, that we captured over time, and then you would question them about people, right? And people were asking about this one facilitator of Osama bin Laden, and one person talked about how important he was, and the rest of them said, "No, he's irrelevant. He's not important." And she said, "Well, this doesn't make sense." that
Yeah.
one person has talked about how valuable he is and how trustworthy he is. And I think he even maybe had some sort of two-step family relationship.
Mhm.
And, family relationships are very important. And
Mhm.
she's like, and then the rest downplayed him or act like he didn't matter, or some even act like they didn't know him. And so she keyed in on the absence of information.
Yeah. Yeah, she was really good at sort of gleaning things, right? Sort of separating and sort of making it through the chaff. Because didn't they at one point come and
Exactly.
say that that one guy had died, and she was like devastated, and then they figured out she figured out that that wasn't the case, but she did it by sort of peeling stuff back, right? Like all of a sudden
Yeah.
she did some digging, and it was like, I mean, she just wasn't, her tenacity just blew me away, you
Yeah,
know?
and that's how they got him. It's
Yeah.
her sticking to it, going through failures, keeping at it, trusting her gut. Because even when she finally found him, and Boone actually worked in some of the tracking and locating to narrow down what city he was in.
Yeah.
Even when she found him, there were so many people who did not trust or believe in her assessment, very large numbers, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, he was close to a Pakistani military installation, and that caused its own issues, right? So she really had to push and battle to even just go and try to get him. So she really stuck with it. And I think if we didn't have her as the targeter on him, I'm not sure we would have got him.
No, I don't think so either. Not even possible. I think that's the one reason we got him. We got him was because of her. Just, she wasn't going to give up. It didn't matter, right? It didn't matter what you
Right.
threw at her. She was just going to keep going, and then I love that scene in the movie where the director of the CIA, and I don't remember which one it was, but he's sitting with her in the cafeteria, and he said, "So what else have you done for the CIA?" And she's like, "Nothing."
But she had. The interesting part is, I actually wish the movie would have done a better job. She actually took out the leader of two other terrorist groups before bin Laden. So this is like the A team of a target, right? So I wish they would have put that in the movie.
Me too.
But yeah, she basically got the heads of three terrorist groups.
Wow, what a stud.
I
Oh my
know.
goodness. Wow, you learn something new every day. This is so cool.
Yes.
So, okay, so you end up leaving the CIA. Talk about what precipitated you to decide to do that.
Yeah, it was very simple. So I had gone to another city in the US to live, and then it was kind of the come back to the mothership. And I really didn't want to go back to DC at the time. So I started thinking of a plan. And so I was first going to volunteer to go to Kandahar, Afghanistan. And
Mhm.
so that was my plan. And I was putting together a whole kind of like proposal of what I wanted to do when I was out there to try to get approvals to go over there for a year. And then that's when I got contacted by two congressmen. It was Trey Gowdy and Jason Chaffetz, former congressman now. And
Mhm.
they wanted to come meet me, and they flew down to visit me and had a whole discussion with me. And it was after that discussion, Mr. Gowdy offered me a job on the select committee in Benghazi. I, of course,
Mhm.
first said no. I'm not working for Congress. Um, and then I wasn't as nice. And Boone was like, "You're really rude to him. If he comes back and talks to you again, you should consider it." And so maybe like 3 or 4 weeks later, and this was about a week before I was going to put in my Kandahar proposal, he called. He said, "Just come up to meet the team and see how you feel." And so I said, "Okay, I'll fly up to DC and at least meet the team and have a discussion." And that's kind of how I slowly got recruited out of the CIA.
Okay, $64,000 question. Boone said you were what to them?
Rude.
Okay. Let's use his words. When you were what Boone called rude to them, how did they react?
Well, I didn't pay much attention to Congress, and there had been a Benghazi report that just came out, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
But it was came out by Mike Rogers, but in my head I just assumed it was all the same people. And the report didn't even have the number of Americans right in Benghazi. So I was like, "You put out a horrible report. Why would I work for you? It would make me look like crap, like all this stuff, right?" And then it was Boone was like, "You're really rude, and that wasn't their report." And I was like, "Oh, oops." So that was that. But that report was horrible, and that
Mhm.
report was bad enough to where no one would want to go work for Congress, right? So I still was in the right.
So it was sort of because they slapped that report together, and you're looking at it and going, this is horrible. And then they're coming to you and going, hey, we want you to work with us on this. And you're like, I'm not slapping something together for you, right? Like
Right.
you're
Well,
helping
yeah.
them, but you're not writing the report, right? And so all of a sudden you're looking at this going, that's not my standard,
hmm Yes.
right?
Yeah. The report was very bad. To this day, I still think it's one of the worst reports I've ever seen on Benghazi.
Why do you
So,
think they wrote it
yeah,
if it was that bad?
I think it was political. That was Mike
Trying to spark
Rogers was
something?
running it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was prior. Trey Gowdy had much different standards.
Yeah.
So luckily, I saw it would be slightly different, and he did things from an ethical point of view, and he really didn't want to focus on the political side of it. He wanted to get the story right, and he wanted to get the story interestingly in the voice and tone of people who were there. And that's why his Benghazi report, it's mostly quotes because he
Yeah.
wants the people there to tell the story. So he did it in a really interesting way too that I really respected.
Could you tell he used to be a prosecutor?
Yes, he's very good at it.
He was a very good prosecutor, right? And he wrote a book about questions that I dearly love. I'm a big, just full disclosure, I'm a big Trey Gowdy and Jason Chaffetz fan. So, yeah, so I think the world of both of them. I'm writing a book on the power of questions right now. I'd love to interview you for that, by the way. And his book was amazing, absolutely amazing about the power of asking, right? Just an amazing guy. And I love the fact that he kept coming, even though you said no to him. I love the fact that he kept coming because he didn't get to where he is today by taking no for an answer. And that's in the book, by the way, just so we're clear, right? So, all right. So they end up coming back. They end up getting you to come up and look at and talk to the team. And then you end up deciding to join that team. At that point, then do you have to separate from the CIA, or are you separating from the CIA on because you want to?
Well, I first go up there and I'd never been to Congress. So it wasn't that exciting because it wasn't like someone gave me a tour and then I went to the office. I just roamed around a building until I found this office like 2 floors down in a basement.
Oh,
So I
geez.
get to the office. And then I get in there and it's still kind of like messy. Okay. And they'd be like, oh, we've been putting the office together for 7 months. I was like, 7 months? I can put an office together in a weekend. So I'm already like, these people don't have their crap together, right? So then
You got a little bit of a bias though for this Mike Rogers thing. So you're sort of right. You're looking for them to correct it, aren't you?
I'm a very efficient person, right?
Yeah.
Like if I had to get something done, if someone told me to set up an office, like it would seriously be done in less than a week, right? It's just how I do things. So I was like, 7 months to move some desks into some room in a building you already own. It's like the craziest thing. It's not like they had to go get real estate or go buy something.
Right.
So then, crazy. So then I go to conference room and sit with them and we talk. And they had two really interesting people on the committee. And then a gentleman who was running a staff and he slept and was snoring during it. So I was like, this is nuts. So I leave and I call Trey and I said, I'm not taking the job. I was in a basement. And then there was a guy snoring at the table. And then because he's good at persuasion, he knew I didn't want to live in DC. So what if I make a deal with them and you don't have to live in DC and you would just come up once a month and those type of things. And I said, okay, I'll consider it now. Because remember, my other option was maybe going to be a year in Kandahar.
Mm-hmm.
So he offered me something and we had a lot of discussion. He said, give it time. I'm putting together the right people, like have some faith and some trust. And at the time, he wanted it to be a joint committee. He wanted the Republicans, Democrats to sit together. He said, this is going to be almost like the ethics committee where I'm going to get people to work together. He unfortunately didn't. He was a little idealistic.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, but it doesn't work in Congress. So he had really good ideas and seemed sincere, right? So actually, because it's government service, I just left CIA on a Friday and I started on the Hill on a Monday, and I didn't lose, I just transferred my service because I was in the government retirement service, so it didn't really affect anything.
Right. So how did you feel when you left the CIA?
So I really didn't think about it much at the time. And the funny part is, because I wasn't in DC, I actually dropped my IDs in the mail. So I didn't actually go to the building. And it was like after I dropped them, I was like, shoot, I should have someone go look on my desk and grab anything important. So my friend Mike went through my stuff and he grabbed like a couple coins. We got coins for Warzone service. So he grabbed my Warzone coins. And then, yeah, so I didn't really go back. And then when I was on the committee, I did go back to the CIA and it did feel a little weird because I kind of didn't like say goodbye to anyone. I didn't do like, I don't know even what you're supposed to do when you leave the CIA, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it was almost just like I didn't kind of really skip a beat. And then after the fact, I was like, oh, I should have went around and got like emails and phone numbers, right? So yeah, it was just this quick transition because I really had no intentions of leaving the CIA. I
Yeah.
probably never would have left the CIA if he wouldn't have
Yeah.
come to me at the time. And I cared about Benghazi at the time. If
Yeah.
it would have been a committee on anything else, I never would have left the CIA.
So since you mentioned it, I have to ask you this. When Benghazi happened, and when you look back on what happened in Benghazi, and I know you wrote an entire book about it, and it's your book's brilliant, by the way, the one you and Boone wrote. How do you feel about what happened?
Well, it's kind of become all consuming, right? Because Boone and I have now been working on this investigation 10 years. So it's
Yeah.
kind of this piece of our lives now.
Yeah.
At the time, I was still hopeful and thinking the US government was going to go after these attackers, right? So when
Yeah.
I left CIA, I thought, oh, there's a whole shop going after our attackers. And so I really didn't think anything of it. I just thought there'd be justice. I thought they'd, do drone strikes and detain
Mhm.
people and everything that happens right against terrorists. And then it was when I realized they weren't doing that, that's when I got soured a little bit about it. And then that's when, as you know, Boone and I decided to just do our own investigation
Yeah.
into the attack and the attackers.
So the book comes from a place where you want people to and again, we're talking about you and Boone wrote a book called Benghazi, Know Thy Neighbor, right? And I want
Well,
to
it's
make
know
sure.
thy enemy.
Yeah.
It's know
So
thy
go ahead.
enemy.
Sorry.
We don't want them to be your neighbor. If they're your neighbor, please report them.
Right. But Know Thy Neighbor is the title, right?
No, know thy enemy.
No, I apologize. I'm sorry. Know Thy Enemy. I apologize. Sorry. Jeez.
You're gonna start some bad rumors. People are gonna
I
think
apologize.
Benghazi
No, I
guy is living in
apologize.
all
That's
their
terrible.
neighborhoods.
That's
I'm
terrible,
just
right?
kidding.
Yeah, if they're your neighbor, turn them in. That's awesome. I love that.
Yes,
So
please.
there's an action plan for you, right? Scott's always talking about your community action plan. I love this
Yep.
guy, right? So, 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 so you and Boone write this book about Benghazi, and you're writing it, I believe, and just okay. Let me back up. Why did you write the book? Sorry.
So we didn't write a book. We did an investigation, and
Right.
then we got to the point in the investigation where I was still working with the government. I'm back
Right.
with the government at the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, how are we going to give anything from our investigation to foreign governments because all
Right.
these terrorists are in foreign countries? So at that time, we decided let's put the investigation in a book, put
Gotcha.
it through CIA's publication review and DOD's publication review so we can give it to foreigners. That's the only reason we put it in a book form, is so we could release it and not get in trouble for sharing it with foreign governments, because now it's just a book and you can say, go get the book. Here's a PDF of the book. We gave a PDF, a free copy of the book, to anybody from a foreign country who was in the law enforcement, security, military that reached out to us. So nobody foreign had to buy the book if they wanted a copy.
Gotcha. And the idea behind the book is the genealogy, right? It's the terrorist family tree. I mean, it is crazy, absolutely nuts, I think, how connected everybody is, right? And
Yeah, I
how
call it jihadi genealogy.
oh my
so
goodness,
you have the right
it's
term.
yeah, it's Pakistan. It's I mean, they're everywhere, like everywhere. Yeah, you think of them as hotspots. You think of the Middle East as being pretty, cooking right now, that kind of thing, right? Violent, whatever. But I mean, there's people in Yemen. There's people from Yemen. I mean, Somalia, Mali, all these places, and you're like, what? I mean, it's crazy how much all of this was interconnected and still to this day is interconnected. And I'm telling you, reading that book is scary in that and enlightening, right? Because it's like all of a sudden, and you've talked about October 7th, right? And how they used a terrorist training camp. Hamas used a terrorist training camp in Afghanistan, right? That we built, I think, right? That the U.S. government built. I mean, crazy, right? I don't know why that's doing that, but it's one of those things where it's fascinating how sort of all of this is so much more connected than people realize, right? And Scott's talked about
Hmm.
this on his podcast with, I forget the guy for the IDF's name, but he talked about how
Yeah,
October
Doran.
7th is really it's a practice deal, right? It's just a dress rehearsal. They're getting ready. They're getting geared up for what's coming here. And I do want to talk about that. But let's talk about Benghazi for a second. When Benghazi happened, and now that I know more about it from your book, I'm even more angry about it than I was before. Like Operation Pineapple Express, when you read Scott's book, will anger you about our withdrawal from Afghanistan, right?
Yes.
It will. I mean, I don't care who you are. You're going to be angry by the time you're finished reading it. You admire Scott and all of the people that were involved in Operation Pineapple Express even more than before. You know what I mean? And I'm so glad that like Nizam and his family are doing well and all that kind of thing. Um, this is one of those things that was preventable. This didn't have to happen. It didn't have to happen. What I feel like I got from your book, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like one of the things that caused Benghazi was hubris on our part. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, one of the issues is a lot of people don't understand this. So if you're in country, it doesn't matter if you're CIA, NSA, whomever, you collect on what basically the policymakers tell you, right? We
Yeah.
have a national intelligence priorities framework. And
Mhm.
at the time, our policymakers only wanted to hear political things about Libya and then things like the oil industry and whatnot. And then government formation, right? What percentage of women are going to be in the government? Those type of things. They did not want to hear about terrorism anymore. They definitely didn't want to hear about Al Qaeda. So they didn't give us the resources and the funding and the support to actually go after Al Qaeda and focus on Al Qaeda. So we were pretty much in the dark in Benghazi. We didn't even have one source in Al Qaeda when the attack went off, which is scary because Al Qaeda had made Benghazi their base in
Yeah.
North Africa at the time. They had training camps inside Benghazi, right, within miles of where we were living. And actually, there were leaders of Al Qaeda meeting with the CIA, and they didn't even know they were Al Qaeda commanders. That's how bad it was, right? So we were in a really tough spot where we didn't understand our enemy. And it is an arrogance that people focus on, oh, this is what's in our classified channels. This is fact. And it actually wasn't until I left for the CIA and did my own investigation and talked with Libyans, especially the people of Benghazi helped us obviously with our investigation. I learned, oh my gosh, I only knew like 1% of what was going on. The CIA made me think I knew 90%, which is a very dangerous situation to be in.
Yeah, no kidding. The thing is, and again, I'm just going off what the book talks about, right? But it feels like from your research, it feels like that what happened in Benghazi was they were literally just lambs to the slaughter. Like they were sitting out there completely undergunned, completely undermanned, completely like they had no backup. They had no quick reaction force. They had the quick reaction force was in Italy, right? And they never got the
Yeah.
call.
Well, not exactly. So the basically the SIF was on a training mission in Croatia. And when they got the call, they didn't have airplanes with them. So then when the airplanes came to them, the pilots took crew rest. So when they finally repositioned back to Italy, they got there around the same time as the team got there from North Carolina. So they
Wow.
just could not respond because they weren't positioned to respond on 9/11, even though they were the commander in extremist force. It was supposed to be their job. So it was a huge military failure to
Yeah.
not be postured for 9/11, especially because they knew in advance. So it was maybe like the third week of August, those
Yeah.
protests in Egypt were announced. So
Mhm.
they knew there was going to be this unrest outside of the embassy in Cairo, and they
Right.
did nothing to move any resources or assets even near Cairo, which is crazy
Yeah.
if terrorists would have overrun that embassy, right? So it was just a failure of military planning on every level. And it really bothers me that they don't call out the military more because I don't think they've ever fixed it.
Well, that's another conversation too. But do you feel so? Let me back up. You know how they do these, and again, I'm talking about terrorists, but you know how terrorists do these operations, and they do them as sort of it's sort of a recon thing. They want to
Hmm.
see, like October 7th, right? October 7th is basically, we think, a dress rehearsal for. Actually, I think we know it's a dress rehearsal, right? At this point, for what's coming to the U.S. The Do you think Cairo was that way too? Like they did that, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Hey, they didn't respond, so now we can go. Now we can execute Benghazi." Or am I
No,
giving
it
too
actually
much
didn't.
credit?
No, it actually didn't work out that way. Well, so Zawahiri's brother did plan the protests in Cairo. They had to slightly move the date on it, so it ended up being 9/11.
Right.
They chose 9/11 for the Benghazi attack because on September 6th, they got like the itinerary that Ambassador Stevens was going to have in Benghazi, and 9/11 was the only day he was not leaving the compound so they could make him time and place predictable. So they ended up
Mm,
occurring on the same day, and there were people in Cairo who knew it was going to happen, but they didn't actually align the two. The two just aligned by chance, actually.
I got you. I got you. So I love your book. Absolutely love the detail that you guys go into because it's so revelatory, right? It's amazing. I mean, I had no clue whatsoever, and I had already interviewed Scott twice, right?
Mhm.
We never talked about Benghazi, but I should have, from the conversations I've had with him and reading his books and that kind of thing, I should have, I feel like anyway, been prepared for how involved this was, like how connected this was. I was not prepared for this. It blew me away how, and I don't know if anybody's given you this feedback, but it's really surprising when you read it how detailed. I mean, obviously you can see you guys spent 10 years doing this, and it took a lot. I mean, I'm saying this, right? It took a lot for you to find all these people and find who was connected to who and all that kind of thing. I mean, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. What's the number one takeaway that you have from writing the Benghazi book?
That the US government could have done more. So,
Yeah.
if you don't know, the US government only found 30 of the attackers. We are right now at 163 of the attackers at the consulate, and we found the entire 10-man mortar team that attacked the CIA when the US government didn't even find one of them. So, it just shows that they have all this money, all this resource, decades of experience in counterterrorism. But if it's not politically important enough, they don't do the job, right? And so that's the frustrating part, seeing, hey, if me and Boone could do this on a shoestring budget, the government could have done so much more. And it's a very frustrating thing when you lost friends.
Yeah, if you just point the resources, right? If you just point the resources in the right direction. So a lot of this comes down to whose administration it is and what their priority is, according to what you're saying, right? And I've heard you talk about this
Correct.
before in other interviews where you've talked about it depends upon what their priorities are in terms of what is it are they what is it that they want us to pursue. And in a lot of these different places, Afghanistan being one of them, you were given really weird targets, like really weird priorities, and Libya too, right? That where you were researching certain things, but you weren't researching the things that you needed in order to defend people and help them, right? It was like
Right.
it was crazy. So
Well, a really good example is today. Okay. So if you just discuss the country of Somalia, for
right,
example, 45% of the country is run by Al Shabaab, which is Al Qaeda.
right,
Okay. ISIS runs 5% of the country, and Houthis don't own any territory. But the US priority right now in Somalia is ISIS, who only has 5%, and the Houthis. It's not Al Shabaab, who runs almost 50% of the country and is planning to overthrow the whole city of Mogadishu, right? So we're still, it's like they pick and choose, and usually, and it's crazy because 9/11 happened, usually it's Al Qaeda they don't want to deal with and Al Qaeda they want to ignore. And so the focus ever really since the failure of ISIS's JV. It's like ISIS, 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 ISIS. And they don't want to hear anything about Al Qaeda. And even when Benghazi happened, they covered up Al Qaeda was involved. They covered up the Haqqani network was involved in Abbey Gate. They covered up Al Qaeda was involved in October 7th. They keep doing it no matter the administration. It's very dangerous. And it makes it so people aren't prepared. They don't know how powerful Al Qaeda has become again.
Yeah. And that's, okay. So let's talk about that for a second, if it's okay. Okay. So, so you wrote a book with Scott and with Legend called The Gathering Storm, right? And that's about an attack that's imminent here. And and everybody thinks, from what you're saying, from what your sources are telling you, it's going to happen this year, and it's going to make 9/11 look like a Christmas party, birthday or kindergarten birthday party or something. So can we talk about, and again, I want to go back a little, if it's okay, because I know I'm jumping all over the place, and I apologize, but let's talk about Afghanistan specifically. Okay. So 9/11 happens, and all of a sudden we have this focus, this hyper myopic focus on 9/11, right? Or on Afghanistan. And we're going after Osama bin Laden, and we're going after Al Qaeda, and we're going, right? And the Taliban is giving them cover and all this kind of stuff. And we go into Afghanistan. Scott went into Afghanistan, right, as a Green Beret, all that. And there's some 30,000 Afghanis that we promised if they helped us, we would help them. We would bring them to the US, and we left them there. Now, Scott has talked about the Doha Accords. And I was shocked when I was talking to him and I was reading his book about the fact that the actual in power Afghani government was not involved in the Doha Accord talks at all. They weren't involved in the discussion. It was just the Taliban and the U.S. federal government. And just the symbolism of that is horrible, right? Massive mistake. Okay. And it sounds like that mistake is continuing now to sort of snowball. And what I mean by that is, when you're the administration in power, you don't want to be the one standing there going, yeah, whoops, we missed it. Right. And when the previous administration, the first Trump administration went out of power, okay, and then the Biden administration comes in, they're blaming the Trump administration because they negotiated the Doha Accords, right? But then all this stuff starts happening. Kandahar falls, all this, Kabul falls, right? This whole country falls, and I don't know exactly what they expected, but what's scary about it is, to me anyway, is they did not expect what they should have expected. And I hope I'm not saying this wrong, but the way I look at it, we just weren't prepared. We didn't leave Afghanistan the way we should have left Afghanistan by any stretch of the imagination, right? And there are a lot of people, I don't know how you feel about this, but there are a lot of people that feel like we should have never left. We should have at least left a skeleton force there, right? That, 2,500, I've heard 5,000 from some people, that kind of thing. And we should have kept, is it Kabul or Kandahar we should have kept?
Bagram
Air Base, right. So we should have kept all that. And according to Scott, we left all of the human intelligence, all of the biometric intelligence there for the Taliban to take and do with whatever they want to do, right? What's interesting to me, and I want to make sure we talk about this, is I want to talk about what life is like right now in Afghanistan, but I also want to talk about how the Taliban has become this sort of master marketer. And what I mean by that is, they're part of the Doha Accords, right? Afghanistan starts to fall. What are people supposed to do? What is the Afghan army supposed to, because they're watching all this, guaranteed they're watching all this. Are they supposed to defend a government that wasn't even involved in the Doha Accords at all by the U.S. federal government. So what, the fact that Afghanistan fell as fast as it fell, I don't think that necessarily, for anybody who's keeping up on this stuff, I don't think that surprises a lot of people. It didn't surprise you, did it? How fast it fell?
No, but it's because the government hasn't been completely honest why it fell so fast, right? It fell so fast because they stopped giving supplies, doing like SIGINT support, doing air support to the Afghan government and the Afghan military in the months leading up to it. So they
Oh,
lost,
so they
can you
choked them
imagine,
off.
like your whole yes, they choked
Oh
them
my
off.
God.
Then the other thing that they're not honest about is they talk like the government fell to the Taliban, but the two operational leaders of that offense were Abu Ikhlas al-Masri, a senior member of Al-Qaeda, and Abdullah bin Laden, the son of Osama bin Laden. It was Al-Qaeda who planned that offensive. So to me, of course, you cut off all their supplies, you don't give them air support, right? You blow up their ammo, and then Al Qaeda's leading an offensive. What do you think's going to happen? And then remember,
Right.
they have no legitimacy anymore because the U.S. government isn't backed the Taliban.
Right.
So yeah, there was only one outcome, was it for it to fall to the Taliban, because the U.S. actually back in 2013 started the negotiations with the Taliban, and that was always their plan and their goal. And the sad part is no one ever got in the way and said, hey, this plan you've been doing for all these years isn't smart. It's not a good idea. People just kept marching in line. Every administration kept going along the same path. And so people like, oh no, new administration is going to come in. They're going to change it. That isn't how it happens. It's not how foreign policy happens. It's not how the State Department works. And I wish people would pay more attention to that because they keep allowing these failures, administration after administration, no matter the party.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to talk about because we just keep repeating the same deal, right? And the Taliban is now saying, "Oh yeah, we're fighting Al Qaeda." I think that's the biggest bunch of crap I've ever heard in my life, and that's what you've been saying for. I mean, you've been trying, bless your heart, to shout this from the rooftops, right? That and Scott has too, but these people are not telling you the truth. We're dealing with them as if they're a valid entity, right? Like an accepted
Right.
member of the League of Nations or Family of Nations, so to speak. And it's like, what? Come on, I mean, it's not what it seems, and we're taking them on face value, which is sort of the dumbest thing we could possibly do. And that's what bothers me about all this is we're going down this sort of road of hubris, so to speak, right? Because like the thing that caught Israel flat-footed, I think, and from what Scott's talked about on his podcast with that IDF officer, was which one I'm talking about, the one that drove all night to get there.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, there you go. Sorry, I couldn't think of his name, but I mean, what a hero, right? But they caught him flat-footed because of hubris. Like they literally had a meeting like the day before and said, "Oh no, this couldn't happen," type thing, right? They didn't think 9/11 could happen either. People, I mean, come on, right? We literally, as a country, as a nation, as the Bush administration didn't believe the CIA, the PDB, right? The PDB that the president was getting, saying that Al Qaeda's looking at taking planes and flying them into buildings. Oh no, that can't possibly happen. I think the whole idea of it can't possibly happen needs to go away forever. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
Yeah, but one of the failures in that memo, so that was written like the first week of August 2001.
Yeah.
One of the failures, there was CIA put their own bias in it, and they called that sensational reporting that bin Laden wanted to take a plane and use it, right? So even CIA put in the word sensational. And we can't be doing that, right?
Yeah.
Because then that influence, of course, if you read that, you're like, yeah, that's crap because CIA called it sensational.
Push it
It's a
aside.
problem. Like they can't do that. Yeah. So that's really frustrating when you read that. And now when you look at what's happening now, and it's the exact same thing, but worse because the terrorists are more. Because Al Qaeda only had 4,000 members in 2001 when they did the attack. Now they have over 100,000. We're talking on different scales right now.
Well, and let's just talk about this for a second because I just want to make sure that we sort of draw this to connect this, right? So what happens with 9/11 is Osama bin Laden, who was a member of the Saudi royal family, okay, comes to Afghanistan, sets up shop. He's upset. He creates Al Qaeda. Taliban gives him safe haven, which is exactly what's going on now. The same exact thing that happened back then is happening right now, okay? With the exception of they're getting, what is it, $40 million a week from us?
It's over 100 million a week.
100 million a week. Yeah. I mean, what can you do? What kind of damage can you do with 100 million a week, right? Give me a break. So, so, so what I want people to understand is before 9/11, he's setting up shop. He's, declaring jihad on the United States, and we're the infidels and all this kind of wonderful stuff, right? And then 9/11 happened. Okay. Then we turn our focus on Afghanistan. We go into Afghanistan and we try to carpet bomb the place. Okay. And, people like Scott went in and did and worked with the indigenous population, right? And he talks about the fact that like they were helping them farm. They were helping them. I mean, how
Right.
sweet are these guys? Like it's, you know what I mean? Like they go in and they win their hearts and minds by making their lives better. I mean, it's freaking cool. Anyway, what I wanted to get to was I feel like we're repeating history. Okay. And the reason I say that is this thing that happened on New Year's Day or New Year's Eve, right? And New Year's morning in New Orleans.
Mhm.
That is, I think, a recon test. Like we're testing the waters to see, almost like trying to figure out what sort of a response we're going to get, right? I feel like it's part of the beginning of a potentially a much larger attack. And we're back to the thing where I need you to tell me this, but I feel like we're back to the place where the FBI is not talking to the CIA and the CIA is not talking to these people. And it's like this competition thing within the Department of Homeland Security, right? Can you talk to that for a second? Because I really do feel like we're in this place of hubris as a nation, and I feel like it's dangerous.
Yeah. Well, first, when you talk about, right, the January 1st attack in New Orleans, I, I don't really think the government's been completely honest about it. They've kind of made people think it's an ISIS lone wolf when it really sounds like it was ISIS directed out of Iraq. So,
Yeah.
right, it's a real ISIS attack. Also, that was supposed to be a much bigger attack. Remember, his bombs didn't detonate.
Yeah.
So I think his bombs were supposed to detonate at midnight. They don't. He's waiting. He's waiting. He's waiting. He's like, screw it. And he does the vehicle ramming and does some shooting because the bombs didn't go off. So a
And
lot
like
of
1 o'clock,
people,
right? It was like 1 o'clock in the morning or something
yeah,
when
I
he,
think three. I think he
yeah,
waited a few hours hoping
yeah.
the bombs were still going to go off. So people like are really like don't have any understanding that probably 100 plus were maybe supposed to die then. So actually that was going to be a big attack, just the
Yeah.
bombs failed. And then yes, there's supposed to be multiple attacks like that by ISIS, but Al Qaeda has support to them in the United States, kind of in more mid-tier cities, as we like to call them, et cetera. So yeah, that's the plan of that is to continue. Now, when you talk about the CIA and the FBI not talking, the biggest issue is what you already said. They gave up 98% of intelligence collection in Afghanistan. So all this is being planned in Afghanistan and Syria. Well, look, in Afghanistan, we meet with the Taliban. In Syria, we meet with Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, who's al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
So we're getting our information from two terrorists, and that's what we're supposed to believe from the U.S. government is going to protect us, right? And that's really a scary thing. They lost their access and their sources there. And if you can imagine, a lot of these former sources now won't even work with the government. There was a belief, hey, maybe when the new administration comes in, they'll take us on. But within the first 2 weeks of the new administration, they sat down with Sirajuddin Haqqani, and that pretty much broke all the rest of the trust for the people waiting for the new administration and saying, we'll go back and work for the CIA. They said, we're done. If the new administration is also going to work with the Haqqanis, they're the same as the old administration. So we lost all trust from the sources we used to have, and they're not going to give information to the US government, which is really scary. Even which it was interesting for the Hamas attacks, there were people giving. So think about this. Mm-hmm. Afghan Muslims were giving stuff to the IDF and not the US government about that attack. They didn't even want to hand it to the US government because they no longer trusted them that they would give it to the Jewish state, which they didn't really have the best view of, right? So that's how bad it's gotten where people don't trust giving the information to the CIA or the FBI, and our government's not being honest about that they're not getting quality information anymore.
That's so scary.
I know.
I mean, if that doesn't give people chills, because it did me, right? If that doesn't give people chills, they need to check themselves. I mean, the long and the short, and I'm not trying to sensationalize this. I'm just trying to get to where the facts are, right? And this is, there's a I don't know how to say it. I hate to say it this way, but there's sort of a yin and a yang in every deal, right? And we left. And I believe the number is 30,000 plus. We left 30,000 plus Afghanis that helped us over a 20-year period, right? And we just left them there. We didn't bring them. We didn't bring them into the U.S. We didn't do the things for them that we told them we would do, thus Operation Pineapple Express, right? What's life like in Afghanistan today?
Yeah. Well, like you said, there's a big trust that's broken, right? There's a couple different things that happen. One is we did bring some Afghans. We didn't vet them. So we actually brought some of the bad guys, right? Which breaks trust. Some Afghans, we brought them and not their wives and children, and they're still over there. And then the Taliban are using them as blackmail or saying they're going to marry their daughters off to terrorists, right? That breaks trust. And then there's this whole other piece that nobody's usually really talking about, but they turned off basically all the phones. So if, let's say, you're a CIA asset, you would call in and provide information. They turned the phone off. So
right, the number you would call doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, but that person now, if he gets threat information, he doesn't have the number to call anymore. And after you turn off the phone to him, he doesn't want to call you anymore because he thinks you're going to give his details to the Taliban, and the Taliban's going to come and kill him, right? Because the Taliban has his biometrics.
Well, we're so befriending and we're financially supporting the Taliban, who they fear.
And we have given information to the Taliban that has led to allies being detained. It just has happened. The government can lie and say it hasn't, but there's been allies detained, there's been allies murdered. Even when we provided the information on Hamza bin Laden, so Hamza bin Laden popped up in September 2022. The information got provided to the U.S. government. The source of that information was tortured and killed. His baby was burned alive and his wife was beheaded in front of him. And the only people that information was given to was the US government. So that's why people don't trust giving them information anymore, because they're giving information to the Taliban. They're meeting with the Taliban. They have a collaborative relationship with the terrorists. And I don't know how we're going to fix this. I think the trust is so broken that I honestly think even some of our allies are just like, let them get hit. Let the US get hit. They deserve it for not caring and backing the terrorists.
I hope that's not what's going to happen, but I fear that it will. I mean, that's really bad. That's really, really bad. So, pardon me, let's talk about the Gathering Storm for a second. So you and Legend and Scott write this book, and I know.
Well, that's not exactly accurate.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Back up. Okay.
Oh, no worries.
Go ahead.
So Scott went to a large number of people. I don't even know what it ends up being, 12, 15, 20. So intelligence analysts and targeters like me, people who were in the Afghanistan military, people who were, as you know, in the IDF, NATO analysts, people actually, which is really interesting, investigators on prior terrorist attacks. He talked to like the investigator from Mumbai, for example. So he went and interviewed all these people and then compiled it, if that makes sense. So it's a very large grouping of people that made the Gathering Storm.
Gotcha. So you contributed to it.
Yeah, I'm one of the people he interviewed for it.
I got you. So in the Gathering Storm basically is this attack that's coming, right? So there's like from what I've heard anyway, and from you and actually other sources, there's upwards of 1,000 Al-Qaeda fighters that are here that are ready to attack the homeland. You guys have said sometime this year, right?
Yeah, there's a couple different numbers, but Al-Qaeda says they sent 1,000 terrorists here to attack the homeland. But then there's other terrorists here, right? We
Right.
recently had the director of NCTC say there's 600 ISIS. I actually believe the number is over 3,000 ISIS in the United States. There's other Al Qaeda members who aren't involved, as you can imagine, in this big 9/11 2.0. And then there's a lot of other terrorist groups. Some of the Pakistani terrorist groups like Tehrik-i-Taliban in Pakistan, Lashkar-e-Taiba. We have a lot of people from like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. We have the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan. What really happened, actually, of course, the terrorists started sending people here, but after the October 7th attacks, there was a lot of scurrying and discussion among the terrorist groups like, oh my gosh, the US government's going to shut their border. Let's go in now. So a lot of terrorist groups just flushed terrorists to our southern border at the time. So we got these extra large numbers, even beyond the ones slotted for attacks in the United States, right? So we don't even know the future intention of probably thousands of these people who've now come here.
Now, one of the things that I've heard you talk about recently is the fact that there's these few thousand, right, that are some are Al Qaeda, some are ISIS, all that kind of thing, and where the Trump administration, the current administration, is prioritizing getting rid of Venezuelan gang members and all Trinidad Aragua and all that kind of thing, and MS-13 and all that. It sounds like they're not prioritizing getting rid of ISIS and Al Qaeda operatives. Is that something that they're not talking about but is actually happening, or is that something that they're not talking about and is not happening?
So I think if they can find some of the terrorists, they're going to remove them. But I don't think there's like a task force or a big
No.
push to make the terrorists the priority. And with the number here, whatever they're doing, they're not removing them fast enough or detaining them fast enough.
Yeah.
So like they're falling very far behind. And as you know, because the focus is on the gangs, it's leading away from the traditional terrorist groups because they're now calling the gangs terrorists. And so when they say we got 20 terrorists, it really confuses people. That's
Yeah.
usually 20 gang members, cartel members. So we're getting this confusion and the populist thinks, oh no, they're wrapping up hundreds of these terrorists, and that's actually not occurring. So we do need a realignment to also focus on this because, as you can imagine, no matter who's president, if you get another 9/11, your whole agenda's done, right?
Yeah.
Your plans are over. And I don't know if the administration really understands this yet. This will change the entire course of the next 20 years of this country. And so it should have been day one issue, but it needs to be prioritized.
Okay. So I have a question, and this is going to sound really sort of out there, okay? But I was asked this question the other day, and it was specific to my last interview with Scott. This person that is a fan of ours that listens to the show asked me specifically, and I thought of you because I'm like, you're coming on in like a week when they asked me this. So it's last week. There's a ton of, and I mean a ton of resources, including military resources that have been deployed to our southern border. There's also a number of cartels that operate both south of the border, and we've caught some of them north of the border, right? And it seems like no matter how much we have in terms of resources, they can get back and forth across the border. Is it possible that there are Al Qaeda fighters that are in Mexico right now getting staged that the cartel's bringing over
Yeah,
without us knowing about it?
while we think the majority of them are here, we agree they're still moving people and supplies over the border.
Yeah.
We do believe Al Qaeda is working on a few different border areas in Texas and Arizona and kind of near San Diego. And then we do believe, at least for Arizona, they actually might be using like the cartel tunnels. So Al Qaeda has relationships with the cartels. And that's another thing that's not really being discussed or explained clearly, that they're utilizing like the fentanyl pipelines, for example. So
Right.
if we're not honest about what Al Qaeda is doing and we're just targeting one piece of the problem, we're going to end up shooting ourselves in the foot, after the fact. And we look back and we're like, why didn't we tie all this together and see how they were utilizing each other to cause us harm?
So here's a question for you, and I actually have a bunch of them, but At having worked in the global war on terror as much as you have, you dedicated a large portion of your life to this. Scott has too, right? For those of you that are in global war on terror legend, right? How do you feel about what's currently taking place? I mean, it's got to frustrate you guys, right?
Yeah, there's this weird narrative in the community, and it's the fact that we're failing against China because we spent all the time and resources on counterterrorism. When no, the community did a really bad job in how they decided to compete with China. Right in Africa, they made all these strange rules for all these countries to abide by, and the rules,
Mhm.
those countries are like, I'm not going to follow this strictness when China and Russia don't make me, right? So we actually failed against China just in general. And we're still failing against China, but they're using the counterterrorism as the excuse, right?
Yeah,
And so
sort
then
of
no
the sort of the
touch.
the poster child, so to speak, right? Or the
Yeah,
being
that's
mirror.
why we
Yeah,
didn't do good against China. And so
right.
now no one wants to touch counterterrorism because that's the narrative and it's kind of the stink, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
so it's a failed. It's just people not being honest that no, we failed at China because we failed at China.
yeah.
Because we also failed to counterterrorism. We failed to counter narcotics, right? We keep actually failing. And why don't we fix the fail? And so that's what I'm worried about. We're not fixing where we made mistakes. And against Russia and China, these mistakes become much bigger, right?
Yeah.
So we have to get this right. And we didn't even get terrorism right. Even before Kabul fell, the Taliban had more territory in 2000 than they did when we invaded in 2001. That's a problem if you're in a 20-year war and the
Mhm.
enemy has more territory. And people have to start being honest about where we're failing. And a lot of these failures are policy. They're not a war fighter. It's you tied their hands and you didn't let them treat the Taliban like a terrorist group, for example. And we
Right.
keep doing this in multiple locations. Africa's been a disaster for
Mhm.
not just terrorism policy, but Russia and China, right? And South America, same for China. And we just keep not fixing our problems and blaming other things. And counterterrorism now has become the blame.
Yeah. I have a question for you, and I hope I heard this correctly. I've done an enormous amount of research on you, mostly because I'm a huge fan of yours, but also because we were going to be meeting. Did you at one time say that the CIA was in a place a few years ago where they would write, where they were evaluated based on the number of reports they wrote
Well, that,
versus, go
mhm.
ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, that's how the CIA works, right? So if you're a case officer, that's a person who goes overseas and recruits spies.
Right.
Obviously, the way they measure your performance is how many reports you write, and that's how you get promoted. And that's why they're okay with the Taliban. The Taliban's giving intel, allies who the Taliban are paying are giving intel, unfortunately. And you're getting your numbers, you're getting your reports, and the community's marking them well. And it's kind of this broken system. Even we talked about Maya earlier. Do you know
Mhm.
the year Maya got Osama bin Laden, she didn't get promoted?
No,
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
that's
Because it's
insane.
yeah, because the metrics are completely different. So, and they're broken, of course. That's not how the metrics should work. She should
Right.
have obviously been promoted then. So that's a problem with how at least the CIA works, and it hasn't been solved.
Okay. Having known everything that we talked about an enormous amount of things today. And thank you, thank you, thank you for doing this. How do we fix it?
So we actually need to understand first that the government is taking in misinformation, and that's a very hard thing to do if you say FBI, CIA. No one wants to be honest, right?
Mhm.
So the terrorists, when they do 9/11 2.0, the intent of it is that we all blame the CIA, we blame the FBI, we blame our government, right? And there's going to be a track record of the last 4 or 5 years of us meeting with these terrorists, right? Us taking in this misinformation, us funding these terrorists, us giving these terrorist visas, right? And so it's almost like we have to just do a complete stop and a reversal of what we're doing on counterterrorism. And it's just this strange belief right now, like, oh, let's bomb something in Syria, let's bomb something in Somalia. Yay, we're back doing counterterrorism. And no, there is no strategy and there's no shift in strategy, which is scarier.
Mm.
And I do think people have to be honest about that. It's the only way we're gonna get ahead of this.
Is it possible, and I'm just throwing this out there, but is it possible that we're focused on other other places in the world like Israel, like Hamas, like Yemen, like Iran, Hezbollah, okay, Syria. Is it possible that we're focused on other areas when really we should be adding Afghanistan to that focus and Al Qaeda to that focus? Like are we almost excluding them because of all this other stuff?
No, we were excluding them, in my opinion, for politics. Even this year, when the DNI's annual threat assessment came out, they completely deleted the word Afghanistan from it. It doesn't even exist anymore under the counterterrorism section. The other part is we actually have a government that thinks they can wheel and deal with the Taliban and keep making deals and appease them and give them money, which will stop the attacks, which is a failed policy, right? And then you can work all those other issues together. Actually, Iran has a role in the homeland attack.
Mhm.
The terrorists trained in Syria. Yemen has a role in the homeland attack. Actually, there's a lot of Yemenis going to be involved in the homeland attack, right? So actually, all these things come together if you're working it correctly, right? So it's not like you have to exclude one for the other. These groups and these organizations and some of these countries, as you can call them now, that terrorists are leading these countries, have a joint strategy against us, and we're still piecemealing the way we go after them.
So we have an ambassador to Afghanistan who obtained, it sounds like, I forget the number. What's the number of visas that they obtained right after the Trump administration took power
Yeah,
for
I don't know.
Afghanistan?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Afghanistan has probably issued over like 75,000 passports or
Yeah,
something. But the issue is how
from
many.
Europe, right? From
Well, the interesting part is they're issuing passports also to terrorists, and that number is a little more important, right? And
yeah.
that number is in like 79,000 range. And what a lot of people, one of the arguments you get is, well, Afghans never blew anything up in the past. It's because their passport was so weak they couldn't get there. Now they can travel here, so it's changed.
Sorry.
I'm dying today.
I'm sorry. I'm keeping you and I'm working your voice.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I was up in New York last week, and
Yeah.
like in my Florida body, we just couldn't take it. It was
Yeah.
too cold. It was in the 30s.
Yeah. It'll get to you if you spend too much time in Florida and then you go
Yeah,
to some place like New York. You're like, ooh, it's cold here. I'm not.
and
I'm not.
it's
I'm not.
weird.
Yeah, I'm not acclimated to this. You know.
Yeah, yeah. So do you need me to redo a piece there?
No, no, you're
Sorry.
fine. You're doing great. You're doing
Me.
great.
No issues.
So what I'm trying to figure out is is there a solution, right? Is if somebody's listening to this and they want to take action, if they want to try to do something, right? Is there something they can do to potentially help solve the problem?
Yeah, I think two real simple steps is you treat the Syrian passport and the Afghanistan passport as compromised, and then you do advanced vetting on anyone who has either passport and anyone who's come in the last 4 or 5 years with either passport. I think that's the fastest, simplest way to quickly get at the individuals with nefarious backgrounds or terrorist backgrounds and get them out of the country. That's the way I would at least deal with the fact that so many are in the country. Then, as you can imagine, you have to go on offense in some way. And one way to do it is you actually strike the command and control of the US homeland plotting, right? That would be obviously the bin Laden sons, Saif al-Adil. He's the head of external operations,
So
for.
so bin Laden's son is married to Mullah Omar's daughter. Did I hear
Yeah,
that right? The
yes,
former head of Al Qaeda's son is married to the former head of the Taliban's daughter.
yes.
What?
And he's married to one of Jalaluddin Haqqani's daughters, so also the head of the Haqqani network. And then his brothers are also intermarried too. So there's a lot of intermarriages between the Taliban, the Haqqani network, and Al Qaeda, to where it's not 2001 anymore. It's not like Taliban harbors Al Qaeda. Now they live in the same home as their blood relatives, their family. So Hamza bin Laden, the son of Osama bin Laden, his two oldest are named Osama bin Laden and Omar bin Laden, right?
Mhm.
Because his grandparents are Mullah Omar and
And
Osama.
Osama bin Laden.
So yeah, the next Osama bin Laden, he's I think about 19 years old. So we're about to have the third generation of bin Ladens. And yeah, there's another Osama bin Laden coming up that will lead Al Qaeda in the future if we don't do anything about it.
And I feel like they've taken marketing classes from here because all of a sudden they've rebranded themselves. Okay. Al Qaeda is now the Taliban, and supposedly the Taliban is fighting Al Qaeda. I mean, come on, man. Right? All of a sudden, the Taliban is not attacking people, ISIS is. All of a sudden, there's no threat to the homeland from the Taliban. It's from Al Qaeda, who the Taliban supposedly are fighting. What?
It's all propaganda.
Exactly. They're still giving them safe haven.
Yeah, our government's not helping with getting the truth out either, unfortunately, which then people aren't getting prepared. And you know, another reason why Gathering Storm exists, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of a round up effort to help, you know, local communities prepare for this.
Well, Gathering Storm is available on Amazon, right? So is Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I want people to understand this. A big part of what happened on October 7th was there was this systemic first responder sort of freeze, right? They just were the system was overwhelmed.
Of
And what
course.
Scott and you and Legend and a bunch of other people are saying are projecting is that that's what Al Qaeda is looking to do. And so one of the things that Scott talks about is you can go to one of the things you can do to prepare, it's sort of an action step, if you will, is go to your local law enforcement, go to your local first responders, figure out who you have in your neighborhood, right? In your immediate area around you, put together a neighborhood watch, okay? And find out who you have that's a former medic from the Navy, who's a former paramedic, who's right, because there's a whole bunch of them that are retired. They're all mixed in amongst us, especially in San Diego. We have a ton of former veterans here, right?
Right.
That are a big part of our community, and they can be a resource for us should this sort of systemic failure happen, because they were literally talking about it could be 7 to 10 days before first responders could get to you potentially, right? That's why
Right.
they're designing these attacks the way they are, is they're trying to create as much in the way of sort of systemic failure as they can, because that creates more fear. There's the terror in the terrorist part. Yeah.
Right. And they want to sideline first responders, like we saw in Israel. I wish this would explain more with the Israel attack. Like they went straight at police stations, right, and massacred people. So then the police wouldn't come and respond.
They
They
also put their uniforms on
had
and
uniforms on.
showed
Yes,
up
we're here
impersonating
to
police
see you.
officers, and people let
Yes.
them in and they slaughtered them.
Yes. So I think a lot more people need to be honest that this is happening so they can plan for it, think through it, prepare. So right, you don't fall victim to some of the same ruses and the same situations. And like you said, you need to be self-sustaining for a number of days because there will be paralysis. The phone lines might be down. I mean, you know, we just had these hurricanes here in Florida, and my phone didn't work for about 5 days. I had no power for 7 days, right? So these things are going to happen during a terrorist attack too. And I think people get lost. I don't know if you remember like a year ago, like AT&T had like some error that came up on their phones, and it made people call 911, and they crashed 911
Mhm.
over an error. And like, right, because people don't even know how to manage a crisis or situation, right? Their phone not working, they call 911.
Right.
So US 911 is going to crash. I have zero doubts it's going to crash, right? So as a family, what's your plan if the phone network's down? Like, what are your go-to spots? You know, have your family plan, have the kids know where to go. Like, if you're at work, like, all this stuff can be done ahead of time, and you can be resilient and not have kind of the panic mode a lot of us had on 9/11.
Well, before 9/11, there was a lot of head in the sand things, right?
Mhm.
Where people didn't want to think about it. And so they just kind of put their head in the sand like an ostrich and they ignored it.
Mhm.
And they were sort of caught flat footed. Okay. Perfect example. There were a whole bunch of rental car agencies that ran out of rental cars. Why? Because there were people stranded in
Mhm.
airports they didn't know, that didn't have facilities, that couldn't take care of them, right? They were in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa, some of them, right? I mean, it was nuts. And they were headed to Washington, D.C. and they were or the West Coast, right? And they were stopped in the middle of Iowa where there's, and I'm just saying that because I had a friend that went through this, right? They ended up having to hitch a ride with somebody that was local to get to a rental car agency that was like 100 miles away. They got a rental car, they ended up getting home, but it took 6 days. I mean, it's nuts, you know? So
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that, I want people to start thinking about, and talk to your first responders. Have conversations with them and ask them, "Are you guys talking about this? Are you preparing for this? What happens if 911 crashes? What can we do?" People need to start having like community meetings and start talking about these things so that at least it's out there and they're starting to think about what their options are and like you said, potential preparations. This is real stuff. And people need to sort of take their head out of the sand for a minute and go, okay, right? Nobody wants another 9/11. I don't know anybody that wants another 9/11 except for the terrorists. And the fact of the matter is, we can head some of this off if we take some action now. I feel like people need to pick up the phone and call their congressman or congressperson, their representatives, right? And start talking to them about, look, are you having this conversation? Right? Are you talking about this stuff? Um, because I don't feel like they are. I feel like this is all just being sort of shoved this way. There's people going to El Salvador to visit a former MS-13 member that was here illegally. I mean,
I know.
come on, man. You want to talk about a waste of tax? Anyway, it's
When
just
they have terrorists in their district, by the way, that they could actually get deported.
hello. Yeah. I mean, it's like, come on. I mean, but that's what I'm talking about is there's this shiny object over here and everybody's focused on that when all this other stuff's happening over here that we really should be focused on. And that's what I thought was so brilliant about having you come on, because I wanted to be able to point out for people, hey, this is really happening, right? This is real. And the thing is, you're more credible than just about you and Scott and Legend, right? Are about the most credible people I know to talk about this kind of thing because of your background and how connected you are in this and how passionate, of course, Scott and Legend are about, and you, right, about letting us know, getting the word out and letting us know about what's happening. So I cannot, from the bottom of my heart, I cannot thank you enough for doing this. I know you have a cough and I know we kept you over time, and you're such an absolute trooper. Sarah Adams, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I cannot. I'm looking forward to having you back. So this was really a lot of fun. Thank you for being here.
No, thanks for having me. I do want to make one quick point
Absolutely,
from
yeah.
what you last said, which is actually interesting. For many years, we had really great Americans deployed overseas, right? Be it Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, etc., over in Yemen, right? Boone was over in Yemen, and they were going after these terrorist attacks, these camps, thwarting the plots, right? They were actively going after the enemy in these locations. Well, that all ended after the fall of Kabul, and we really just restarted doing some of those kind of operations. And so Americans like, oh, for years we heard there's going to be plots and they didn't happen. Well, they were thwarted, right? The big airliner plot in 2006 with a dozen planes was thwarted. Now none of these plots are being thwarted, right? And I really think there's a disconnect because people were saved all these years by really great Americans, risking their lives and leaving their families. And that isn't happening now. And I want them to understand that difference. And then, of course, the other difference of having the open border for so many years and them getting in here and having so many, when you bring in 14 million people, there's not even enough staff in the US government to vet them, right? So they're unvetted. And so we have to be really honest about the environment we're in. And, as you brought up, there are things that are going to happen in this attack. It's going to be bigger than 9/11. And there are things families have to prepare for. Like you said, right? Air travel may completely stop again. If the plan goes as planned, it will, right? What is your plan if you're separated from your family for 5 days, right? It's time now to make that plan, and then you're set, and then you don't have to panic when it happens, right? And
Right.
that's what we want people to do, just prepare and be ready. So then you're not putting your family in a difficult situation, or you don't want them to be scared when something happens because they know they have a plan. And Americans do great with a plan, right? We know we can come through in the end. We know we're resilient, but you got to start at square one and put all that into place.
Yeah, you really do. And, I also feel like, and if I can pile on, get a hold of your local representative, right? Get a hold of your congressperson, your senator, whoever, and start this conversation. Let them know. I mean, one of the beautiful things, I mean, we've only, as I told you before, we've only been doing this 20 months, but we're in 62 countries worldwide, right? And we've been listened to almost 2.8 million times. And so there are people listening to us, and I want them to start thinking about what they can do. And one of those proactive steps they can take is pick up the phone or email or whatever, but start getting in front of the people that are in Congress, right? Start getting in front of them and start letting them know, hey, you need to pay attention to this. This is not something that can be ignored without cost, right? You cannot ignore this without there being a really awful cost to pay. And I hope it doesn't affect people, the way that it sounds like it's going to. And that's why I want people to be aware, like you said, prepare, and also get the word out, start this conversation and start talking with people about what's really going on. Because I don't feel like it's something that they're paying attention to. And I think part of it is, and actually, let me ask you this, because this is one of the things I was going to ask you. There is so much going on in the first 100 days or almost 100 days of the Trump administration. Is it possible that there's too much going on?
So no matter what's going on, right, we have a problem where there's just too much news in general.
Yeah.
Too much is going on in the world. We bring in too much news. It's just too available, right? So every hour you could find some new shiny object of something to look at, right? So I do think the administration, came in strong, but they do have big issues to fix, right? What I worry is when you take on too much, it's hard to be really successful at the things that matter. And that's what I worry about a little bit, right? Also reorging organizations, causing conflict in organizations, as being in your field, right? That has costs, that affects things, affects readiness, etc. And so all of it plays in. And as you know, it really only aids the enemy. And that's what makes me a little worried, right? People take advantage, right? Russia decided to go into Ukraine after the fall of Afghanistan, and we show weakness, right? And so there's other ways you can show weakness that aren't just military, right? And we do have a lot of weakness we're showing in the U.S., a lot of division we're showing in the U.S. We can't come together and unite. Even in parties, they have difficulties uniting, right? And we're only hurting ourselves.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's absolutely true. I cannot thank you enough for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. Thank you again for your time. I'm looking forward to having you back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.